Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've recently done a couple of videos that I called my Unconventional series, where I talk about how baits oftentimes are used only for certain techniques, or they're pigeonholed as being a certain type of bait. But the reality is a lot of baits can be used in unconventional places, and they can be used successfully to catch a lot of fish. And there's a lot of bonuses to that. In some instances, these fish who are generally fished with the same baits are not used to seeing this unconventional bait fished in that area. So it does present those fish with an opportunity to see something different, which a lot of times is all that's needed to generate strikes. So today, I want to talk about the swim jig. The swim jig is one of my favorite baits, and I use it for lots and lots of different techniques. But having said that, most people would look at this and say it's only good around grass. Generally speaking, if you looked at traditional swim jig sales, there's a few places where they tend to really sell well. One is down in Florida. Obviously, it's full of grass and lily pads and submerged and emergent and grasses. And from that standpoint, swim jigs work extremely well because they are weedless. They got a good bullet-shaped nose on it. They come through grass great. Another area where they do tend to sell really well is down in the Alabama region, where guys love to throw them through like bank grass, which again, an emerging grass, during say shad spawns, because you have a lot of shad that are up in those grass areas. Swim jig, great bait for that. And I tend to say that the next area that really sells a bunch of swim jigs is your upper Midwest area. You know, the swim jig, in my opinion, really kind of was created up around the upper Mississippi area and is a dominant bait throughout Wisconsin. Now, having said that, I've always said that I love to fish Florida because it feels like Wisconsin. Wisconsin natural lakes are full of all different submergent and emergent grasses. And from that standpoint, the swim jig tends to absolutely thrive. Now, just because it's a great bait in those regions does not mean it's not a great bait in other regions. So I want to give you some examples of unconventional places where I love to throw a swim jig. And for the record, this is a core tackle swim jig. We will be coming out soon with it. I'm telling you, I've talked about it for a while. It's coming out soon. This is one I just took out of the tackle box. I just want to show you how torn up this guy is. It's a Berkeley the Deal trailer. You can see all the tooth rash on there from lots of different bass catches. Still holding up great. Game worn. You can see the scratches in the head. That's one of my favorite things. Look at a jig head and see the tooth marks in it. All right, so anyways, let's talk about unconventional places to fish a swim jig. First, one of my absolute favorite places to fish them is around floating docks. You can do this year round. A floating dock is a great place. I've had really high finishes doing that at Smith Lake in Alabama, catching big spotted bass. I've had my first top 20 cut in the FLW tour fishing was on Grand Lake, fishing a swim jig around floating docks on Grand Lake. So you very much can do it. A couple of things I love a swim jig around floating docks for is one, again, it's weedless. Floating docks have cables, so you generally can fish this up and over the cables pretty successfully. Two, you tend to be skipping it back under the docks and into areas where it's hard to get other baits, and it's a great bait to skip back in those areas. And three, the fish tend to be suspended under those docks, so you can generally fish this like a swim bait in and around floating docks and generate a lot of strikes from that standpoint. Another place that I love to fish a swim jig is in deeper water, on deep long points, deep grass beds. You know, I'm talking 10 to 15 foot of water, and I'll slow roll them on the bottom. So if you've got a lake that's got some deeper grass and you want to, swim a bait through it, by all means, you can slow roll these through it. You can go out and buy a lot of specialty swim jigs too that tend to weigh more specifically for this tactic. They can be all the way up to like 3/4, even 1 ounce. And the whole idea is if you're swimming it through shallow grass, having a lot of success, why would you not be able to do that in a much deeper depth? Because you're just swimming it through grass at a deeper depth. So a heavier swim jig can be really good for fishing deeper, and you very, very rarely hear people talk about it. But I can assure you, especially up here around my house, there are a lot of guys catching a lot of fish fishing deep weed lines where they've got the bait down 10, 14, 16 feet, fishing that outside deep weed line with a swim jig. So that's something that you don't hear happen throughout a lot of the different parts of the country. Another thing that I love to do with it is fish standing timber. It's for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, again, it's weedless, so you can fish it pretty good through standing timber. And two, the fish tend to be suspended higher up around that standing timber. In a lot of cases, like I fished Toledo Bend earlier this year, the fish were suspended in that 15 to 20 foot range, and you can get a swim jig down into that range pretty well and swim it through that standing timber and give it a shad appearance. So you can generate a lot of strikes, from those fish. So that's another area that I love to fish it. And actually you can fish it pretty much anywhere where you would fish a swim bait. You can fish a swim jig because it really is a swim bait that's just bulked up. So if you're fishing it through the middle of the water column, you can do that. It tends to generate a little bit better average size than a typical swim bait in those same areas. So if you're fishing schooling fish or suspended fish or even forward facing sonar spotlighting fish, you can successfully catch those fish with a swim jig, and it can be something that, again, separates your bait from what those fish see all of the time. So don't be afraid to throw a swim jig through the middle of the water column as well. So those are some of my favorite ways to fish it. Don't think you just have to be fishing grass with it. Just not the case at all. You can definitely fish it deep. You can definitely fish it through open water and around docks and standing timber. It's an extremely versatile bait. The swim jig is one of my go-tos. I have at least one tied on everywhere I go in the country, and it catches them all over, regardless of species. The last thing I'm going to point out too is how good this is in current. It's one of my go-tos on the Wisconsin River here. When I go to the Mississippi River, it works really well in current because a lot of times you've got current that's pushing your bait into objects, into wood, up against a cut bank, into grass, and again, having a weedless presentation that swims properly in current is really critical too. So if you're a river fisherman fishing for any of the three species of bass anywhere in the country, think about throwing a swim jig. One of my all-time favorite baits, one that we will have coming out soon, hopefully middle of March, Bassmaster Classic time. That's our goal. It's just such a good bait. Anyways, guys, if you're not throwing swim jigs, think about throwing a swim jig on your local lakes. I'll put, well, there are no links, I guess. I'll put links to the Berkeley deal as a trailer. It's a really good swim jig trailer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.